All right, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Aplos webinar. This is our monthly educational webinar series. My name is Dan Kimball, and I am a product specialist here at Aplos, and we have some folks still logging on. We're just about, we are at 10 o'clock, and so we are going to get started here in just a quick second after we do a few housekeeping items. Again, I know there's still some folks logging on, and we want to welcome you from wherever you are logging on from. I am super excited about today's webinar. I knew that we're onto something because we've had a lot of signups here to listen to our guest Jay Frost, who I'm going to introduce in a second. So we are going to get going with that. Also, just wanted to just make sure that everybody is seeing their screen okay and hearing the audio. So with that, if you could just type in the question box, just a couple of you, and let me know that you can both see my screen and hear my voice. That would be great. Great. Welcome, Glenn. Good. Excellent. Great. From New Jersey? Great. Awesome. Wow, good. Okay, perfect, good. So we've got good technology, and hopefully that will remain. So from time to time, people lose audio. So if just kind of my word of advice, if you're new to webinars, if you ever feel like you lost audio or you can't see the screen or something, sometimes just help to kind of log out and log back in. I hate to say that, but it does happen. So, but we are thrilled that you guys, all of you, have joined us. If you are a regular attender to our webinar series, we want to welcome you back. If you have never joined an Aplos webinar, we want to welcome you. Again, my name is Dan Kimball. I'm a product specialist. My love and passion has been fundraising the past 20 years. Worked for a number of nonprofits, but I had the unique opportunity to kind of switch hats a little bit about 2 years ago and jump into helping Aplos develop a donor management software system using my fundraising background. But my passion is really talking to people and with people about building relationships and raising funds, no matter the size of your organization. And that's really what we're going to be getting into today. So really excited about what we have with us. So if you don't know us, I encourage you to check us out. We're a software company based in California. We're all about accounting and donor management software. Love for you to check us out, but we are not here to do an infomercial, but just know we're out here to help you. We also have a series of other tutorials, webinars, and things like that that we will offer you. So with that, I'm going to jump right in. I just one other housekeeping item before we bring Jay on is I wanted to let you know that we do record our webinars. And so if you want to share that, we'll get that out there. We record all our webinars, and you'll have access to the slides that Jay shares as well. He's going to talk about that also. So with that, we're going to just one other item is that if you are active on Twitter, you can certainly hashtag Aplos webinar. You can reach me at FugitiveDMK, which I'll show you at the very end. But enough about that, and let's get into why hopefully a lot of you logged on, which is to meet Jay Frost. And I'm thrilled to have Jay on as a guest. He's given us some of his time and expertise and experience. And man, I just can't say enough. You can see his bio right here. The fun thing is Jay was recently recognized as one of America's top 25 fundraising experts. Wow, what an honor to have somebody like that in. And if you are social media active, I'd encourage you to jump on LinkedIn and or Twitter and check him out because he's got great, he shares great content on a daily and weekly basis. So with that, Jay, I want to welcome you to an Aplos webinar.
Thank you very much, Dan. Really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I know you can't say hello back, but I'll trust that you're waving or something out there. Let me go ahead and show my window. And Dan, you let me know when it's visible.
Yep.
Okay.
It'd be good.
Great. All right. Well, it's always strange doing these things, even though I host them a lot. But Dan, I really appreciate your inviting me to do this. It's strange in that I make my living by talking with people rather than at people, although I've been known to do both. But in the world of major gift fundraising, it really is about being able to see people eye to eye and talk with them. Now, for those of you who are attending this, perhaps you're doing so because major gift fundraising is a relatively new thing for your organizations. And if so, then of course that face-to-face interaction may be a little bit alien, but I'm sure that you'll find that, especially if you try some of the things that we'll be talking about today, that it will come quite naturally to you when it gets to the point where you're not thinking about performance, but instead you're thinking about the other person. And I think that's really the core of what raising big gifts is about, is making it about the other person. So today's subject is big gifts in small places, or major gifts for organizations of every size or maybe any size. I really do believe it is possible. I'm seeing it in my own practice as a consultant. I've seen it as an observer and trainer for a long time as well. Organizations that are, from a few $100,000 in budget to organizations that are well over $1 billion. And both of them are using some of the things we're about to talk about. So I'm going to jump right in, and I would encourage you to go ahead and post questions throughout. Dan's going to curate that towards the end. If you see something that really is timely, then of course I'll try to address it as we go in. But do post questions, comments, feedback, tomatoes, whatever you want at any time as we're diving right through here. I'm going to start with this slide, which is probably familiar to most of you, if not all of you, because it's the one we always talk about every year. This is the information from Giving USA, and it's the big cheering section. $390 billion, aren't we excited? But I know that if your organization is not in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, you might look at this and feel like, well, why not me? All the arrows are pointing up, so why haven't we seen these big gifts? Or the other conversation I hear, including with a lot of people outside of our world, which is, why are all these billionaires giving to higher education? Don't they have enough money there already? Or why is that hospital getting all the money? Where is it going to endowment instead of going to feed the hungry, or house the homeless, or help a refugee, or any of the other many things that we know would really benefit from charity? And I want to say that I think actually we have a responsibility for the amount of money which is coming to us.
Hey, Jay, real quick. Jay, I need to.
Yes.
I'm sorry. It appears that your slide is still stuck on the first slide, or it's not changing.
Go ahead and take it. Thank you. Did it move to individual donors and small organizations?
No, did not.
Well, let me see.
Apologize for that.
All right.
There we go. Something just changed.
So what I'm going to do is start and see if it goes. Do you see the title slide?
I am on the $390 billion slide.
Okay. Now I'm going to switch to the next slide. So all of you have your antenna up. Let me know if this does not work. Okay. Do you see the next slide?
I do not. Something changed.
Wow.
There it goes. Now the change. Yep. So
okay.
Daryl, I see the next slide. I see an individual donors and small organization slide. There it is. Yep.
All right. So we'll just work it this way.
Okay.
And if it's hard to see or anything, just let me know, and I'll do my best to try and improve on that.
Jay. All right. There we go.
So there we go. So this next slide, individual donors and small organizations, I think is more of the reality of our world. So while we see the big nearly $400 billion and we wonder where all that money is going, and we know a lot of it's going to our larger brethren, that's actually a very small number of or percentage of organizations that are receiving those very, very significant gifts. There are a number of reasons for that, but let's focus on what your reality is right now first. And that's that, as you can see here from Third Space Studios 2016 Individual Donor Benchmark Data Brief, and I have lots of resources at the end of the presentation for you, including links. Probably many of you are not seeing the lion's share of your money coming from individuals, first of all, and it may be a little small to read, but you can see that for the smallest organizations, only about 48% of the money is coming from individuals. But the bigger the organization, or what they call super organizations, that's as much as 75% of the revenue is coming from individuals. If you went into a capital campaign mode, you're looking at even larger percentages. But here's the statistic that I think is really important, and I'm going to refer to this again later, which is that about 88% of the money is coming from as few as 12% of the individuals in the case of the majority of our organizations, regardless of size. So that's something we'll want to hold on to for a minute. Now I'm going to go on to the next slide. Dan, let me know if you can see that. It's major gift statistics for small and mid-sized nonprofits. Is that coming through okay?
Yes, Jay, it is.
Great.
Yeah. I know a couple of you are struggling seeing some of the smaller print. And again, what we'll do is we'll make these slides available to you and for later on, so you can see some of that. So, yeah.
Hopefully a little bit.
Yeah, that's better. Great.
So the thing I want to point out here is that 95% of charities in the U.S. raise less than $10 million. So assuming you are actually a small organization, and that's why you're here, you're in good company. And only about 14% of the total donated income is coming from what we might describe as major gift fundraising. We're going to better define that in a second, by the way, but only 14%. So what does that tell you? I mean, it's a pretty stark picture that, it means that a lot of us are relying, as you saw from the last slide in this one, from a lot of institutional fundraising if your organizations are small. And that seems like a comfortable and safe space many times, but it does limit your ability to achieve the mission. The other thing I think is interesting here is this $5,000 stat, that the median donation, the most frequent donation amount, which nonprofits classify as representing a major gift, this is their definition, is $5,000. Now, for some of you, $1,000 is a major gift. For someone else, it might be $100,000, believe it or not. And in each case, that's the internal definition. What's most important, of course, is what the donor thinks is a major gift. But much of that is predicated on their relationship with you and also the size of your own budget. And most important of all, whether or not they feel that their money has impact. This is, I think, the most important characteristic of what's going on in major gifts today. So let's hold on to that statistic in our minds too. And then this final number, which I find really interesting. This is all from a study that was done, as you can see here, by Donor Search, Bloomerang, Amy Eisenstein, et cetera. Adrian Sargent was involved in this. That 24 is the mean number of donors that organizations raising less than 10 million annually are cultivating for first gift. So let me put that in English. Most places have a portfolio of about 24 people that they're relying on for large gifts. 24, that's it. So part of what I'm going to be talking about in the next few minutes is how to increase that number, and how to increase that number right next to it, the $5,000, because that's going to be the difference between where you are in terms of your budget and where you want to be, including the amount of income that's coming from major gift fundraising. And actually, those two things are much easier to do than it might seem at first. But I think we really need another definition in order to figure out how to take those steps and raise more money. And that definition would be, what exactly is a major gift? So let me put it in context. It's not so much about the amount. The amount's very important, but it's not so much about the amount. It's about the amount relative to other types of investments that those individuals make elsewhere and make with you. The impact they're having on your program. And so let's put this in the context of annual gifts or sustaining gifts. And I use those two terms interchangeably, although they might mean different things in different places. But the reason I like sustaining personally is because, first, it implies that without those gifts, you really couldn't be sustained. But also it's because an annual gift doesn't only have to happen once, that you can ask people to give on a rotating basis, monthly basis, and it often drives more revenue. And it also helps them to see that their engagement with you is really important, because you can continue to thank them for all those gifts and keep them updated on the work. But any annual or sustaining gift typically is a smaller dollar amount than a larger gift, right? But the reason for that is quite simple. It's because those gifts are being made from income. Think about it as the pocket with the money you have available this month, or your checkbook and the payments you're making, whether it's for your apartment or for a mortgage or for the food bills you have, things like that. These are payments we make out of our income. And so we might be thinking, well, I can give $100 to help out with a relief effort in Houston right now. That's different from what we might think as we're thinking about a special or a major gift. These are typically in the range of 10 to 25 times the annual gift amount. So if we're asking people for no particular amount or very small amounts, making that big leap to a much larger gift may be difficult. But what we want to do is help people become more invested on a sustaining basis. So when we talk to them about something substantial, they recognize the impact they can have by increasing that gift amount. But here's the biggest difference, I think. Again, one comes from income. What do I have available to me right now? The other comes from assets. And so when we're talking to someone about a major gift, it's usually for a very specific purpose. It entails extensive decision-making and discussions. It's really about them. It's not about our needs. It's about their needs as donors to be involved, to see impact, to make a difference with the amount of money that they have, to take money away from their family effectively and give it to you. And that's a big deal. And especially when you think about it in terms of an ultimate or a lifetime gift, which can be as much as 1,000 to 2,000 times their annual or sustaining giving amount. This is where people have said, this is what my life really means. This is how I want to be remembered by my children and other people. This is their chance to have something on their tombstone. This is the reason why Jefferson, he didn't think about this in terms of dollars, but the reason why he prioritized on his own tombstone the establishment of the University of Virginia above being president of the United States. This is the kind of thing that's very important as people say to themselves, I'd rather give this money to my alma mater or to the social service organization in my neighborhood because I believe in it, I've worked with it for years, rather than give all that money to my children. This is the testamentary gift. So these gifts are quite different. They're different in their source, and they're different in terms of the way people feel about them. And they also are different in terms of how much time is involved in developing that relationship and then inviting them to invest significantly in something that really matters to them deeply. That might seem obvious, but I think it's important to stress because ultimately, when we have a large campaign, we're going to be relying on a few people who have been involved with us for a while, and they've had that good exchange of interactions with us, very positive exchange as they've made gifts and seen the difference in our work as a result of those gifts. Then a small pool of those people with resources and that commitment will be able to really finance the big projects, whether that's a capital campaign, that may be a reason why you're here today, or whether it's perhaps for an endowment, so you have the money in those times they're really so tough, or whatever the purpose is, some kind of big evolutionary move is where the major gifts and the ultimate gifts take place. And when we know that most wealth and income is held by a very small percentage of the population, that's what that pyramid on the left is all about. That's from, in this case, I think that's from WealthX, but there are several sources like this that talk about the same thing. In fact, that may be from Credit Suisse, I apologize. But a very small percentage of people who have as much as in the United States, 40% of the wealth held by the top 1% of the population. We're going to have to get to know those people over time and then invite them to be more and more involved in our work, to really share partnership with them in order for them to make these big investments. And what we see is that plays out with the gift pyramids we all know so well, where there's a small percentage of people who usually give us the majority of the money. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, according to the 2014 Fundraising Effectiveness Project Survey report, which is terrific, and it's hyperlinked in these slides, 88% of the contributed funds come from 12% of the donors. In $100 million plus campaigns, we're finding that as much as 95 to 97% of the money is coming from as few as 2.7% of the donors. So if you do make a commitment to major gifts, regardless of whether your organization's a couple $1 million in budget or it's $200 million in budget, you're going to find an architecture somewhat like this over time, because there are only so many people who have both the resources and the passion for your purpose to be able to make major commitments and really endow your work in the future, or to build those big buildings, or to help you get to the next stage of evolution. So the challenge for us is, of course, to find, understand, get to know, and invite to participate a small number of people who can fund your work. And this poses some challenges to us internally, and that's much of what I'm going to be talking about now for the next few minutes. And a lot of that follows on the cycle that you may be familiar with already, which I'm describing here as a major giving cycle. And that's to move from a stage of identification. Here's a person who might be interested in our work, to qualification. That person does have passion for what we're doing and the resources to help. Cultivation, a real path to developing a relationship. Solicitation, what exactly happens when we ask them for money so we're comfortable doing that face to face, 36 to 48 inches away from them. And then finally, stewardship, which is really core to everything we do, to show that we know people are human, that we really care about them, not just their wallets. And that's so vital to what we do. And this is an evergreen cycle. So we wouldn't be identifying them again, but we might be identifying a new level of interest, a new willingness to participate, a new project which is keenly tied to their own personal growth, their own personal mission, which is aligned with our mission. So this is the major giving cycle. And what I'd like to do is take a part to each of these and look at it with you. The first part is, of course, identification. We could spend an hour on each of these subjects. I promise I won't do that. But the first thing here is maybe the question about where do donors come from? And donors can come from lots of places, not from the stork, but certainly from all the places where you might look for someone who might be interested in your work. From the first concentric circle, the board members, the staff, the volunteers, the members. Then the next one, family, friends, former staff, neighbors. The next one, supporters of related organizations or causes. And then finally, anybody who's willing to listen to your story, maybe share it with others. This is where social media has completely transformed our world, where crowdfunding is not so much just because we can put a message out there and a lot of people fund it, but that there might be a person in Singapore or Senegal right now who is as tied to your mission as somebody who's across the street from the building where you're working. And so there are lots of opportunities, but definitely the progression is like that of a splash. You know, if you throw a pebble in a pond, the first place you want to look is where the people are closest to you, where they're already invested, and then working out from there. But never forgetting that there are people perhaps far away who care as much about the subject as you do. So we want to be open to all that, but we want to be thoughtful about our own time, because you can only see so many people per year. And really seeing them is going to be vital to your success. So how do you identify major donors? Now, if we were really doing this in a facilitated group, live and in person, I might ask you this question, but you might want to ask yourself this right now. And in fact, you can pose in some of your questions or comments later, maybe some thoughts on the subject of that, how you're addressing this right now. This is from Daxco, which is a company that works a lot with different, I think it's Salvation Armies or United YMCAs, excuse me. And they did a poll of some of their customers just asking this question. I thought it was somewhat related because many of their organizations are small. And what they find is that they're identifying their major donors first through new board member relationships, just like I was talking about there a second ago with the stork. Another way might be to conduct research on community leaders. And then there's this big other column. And then there's the other one, which I find particularly scary, don't know. In other words, people aren't really sure where to find major donors. Again, maybe that's one of the reasons you're here. So we're going to take a few minutes to talk about identification right now. And one thing you'll be happy to know is that there are, according to WealthX anyway, about 212,000 ultra high net worth individuals. These are people with $50 million in investable assets spread throughout the world. And about a quarter of those are in the United States, and they aren't all in California or New York. They're really all around the country. I know this is really hard to read on your screens, given that we can't blow these slides up right now. But you're going to see that, for example, if you're in Texas working on what just happened there are a good number of folks in Texas who I'm sure are ready to help out with what just happened to Houston. But unless you're in Alaska, which seems to have a dearth of these folks, there are really people virtually everywhere who do have significant resources, and they are not all entirely besieged by your fellow charities. So it's good to know that geographic distribution is pretty good. But there are very specific things that you can use to look at each concentric circle I described, starting with the people closest to you, those already in your database, those who are giving to you on an annual basis, and then working your way out to people you're just hearing about over the transom, the name that was mentioned to you at a cocktail party, the person who just wrote a note in via email and said, "What are you all about?" Or someone even reading your Twitter stream. And these are really the Big Six identifiers that are most effective in the United States. And if you're tuning in from some other place, we can talk about it offline, although much of this will work in many other parts of the world, although the data may not be equally easy to get. But let me just go through these each really quickly. And much of this comes from Donor Search, which has done a project where they looked at $5 billion in known giving from $2 million to 400 organizations of all types and sizes. And they found that these are the most consistent markers for people who are major givers. So not just people with money, but people who are known to be giving it. The first one is giving to your own organization. I know it seems really obvious, but the first place you want to look for a potential major donor is right in your own database, right in your own backyard. It's just like the old Wizard of Oz line, there's no place like home. And that is absolutely true in philanthropy, especially because there are people probably volunteering for your organization who are waiting to be asked for a major gift. I'm not kidding about this. I've experienced it in every place where I've worked on the staff or as a consultant. And a simple way to get to that might be a recency, frequency, money kind of model, which would look at how recently a person made a last gift, how frequently they've made gifts, and then the total cumulative giving over time. You could attach a number to each of these, let's say from 1 to 10, and then rating all your prospects within your database, be able to see where there might be a sweet spot for you to do some additional qualification, because at this point we're just trying to identify people. Another one might be giving to other organizations. If you're wondering where you can get this information, there are two big sources for it. One is at NOSA, which is part of Blackbaud, and they have an independent database. Another is at Donor Search, which has a database that's now tracking about 200 million of these gifts. It's pretty extraordinary. The big point here is that the more people give elsewhere, the more likely they are to give generally to other organizations, and the more likely they are to give larger amounts. It's not just a matter of money, it's also a matter of activity. It's a practiced activity, and it is an indicator of people's willingness to do more. If you want to know who's giving where, you can, in fact, use a free tool that Donor Search has right now, which will give you the last 5 gifts they have associated with anyone in their database. It's not everybody, but it's a lot of people. And you can use that by going to dsgiving.com. So that's dsgiving.com, donorsearchgiving.com, and you'll be able to search on a free tool they have for the last 5 gifts. It's just kind of fun. Board trustee positions. If you ever do a survey of your own friends and family, ask them if they do or have served on other boards. If you're not sure how to do a survey like that, we can talk about it offline, or you can go and check out SurveyMonkey. This is a great thing to do. You want to know if people are serving on boards because they A, have resources, and B, have a passion. You want to know that because it tells you where their passions are, and it tells you that they have influence with others. And those things are all vitally important. If you haven't asked that question of people, you want to start asking it. Another one is political giving. Now, I think it's important to note that A, political giving information is completely public, but B, you're not supposed to use it to prospect. So not for finding new prospects, but it is permissible as far as my understanding is. I'm not an attorney, but my understanding of the statute is that that information is public. And therefore, if you have a donor and you want to know if they're giving political gifts, that information is readily available to you. You can get it through things like Donor Search, or you can get it directly through some of the like the Federal Elections Commission sites, things of that nature. And but as you can see in this slide, a single gift of $1,000 to a political campaign puts your constituent in the top 1/10 of the 1% in the United States. If you find anybody who's given a single gift of $250 or above, then the top 6% of the US population. And these people are all more likely to give major gifts. There's a direct 1-to-1 correlation between people who have given $15,000 or more in political gifts and making major gifts to charity, a 1-to-1 correlation. So in fact, Donor Search did a study, as well as Mark Saloni in the past, and found that as much as 70% of the money that was being brought in by these charities was being given by the 1% of the people who were making these political gifts. So if you can find people who are making political gifts in your database, you have found people who are making major gifts. They may not be making them to you, but they are making them somewhere, and you want to know. And then value of real estate. Now, this may be the least important, but it's still important, and often it's the only data available in terms of assets, and it's all public. So if you know that someone's got $2 million plus of real estate, or you know they have multiple properties, they're 17 times more likely to give than others. This is all a long way of saying, if we're asking for people like the people I've just described for $5,000 or less, the only reason that makes sense is because our organization is so small, or our projects are so small, that asking for a larger amount would be inappropriate. But that amount is probably inappropriate for these people because they know that for the most part, $5,000 has limited impact. Now, if you have, again, a $10,000 project and they've funded half of it with $5,000 and it's fantastic, then that's exactly the right thing to do and to ask for if that's what the donor wants and that's what you need. But if you have an organization that's $2 million in revenue and you have a person that's fit these criteria and you're asking them for $100 or less than $1,000, you're really not showing that you're serious about them. And so that's an important thing to be thinking about and considering as you identify people and develop these relationships. Another area, although it's more, and it's not even in the donor search list, is insiders in the stock market. And we could talk about this for a long time, but I'll just say this. Only about half of the top 1% of the people in the United States fit this criteria of people who are required by law to file that they own stock as major shareholders or directors and officers of public companies. But those people outperform the rest of us in terms of their wealth by 11% a year. Those are the people who are the most liquid. They are in the best position to make gifts oftentimes, and they're not always, again, besieged by other organizations. So if you find you have an insider in there, it's definitely a big plus, and you want to be paying careful attention to those folks. So those are just a few ways to identify some people. And another thing you could do is go to the screening companies, in fact, and take a subset of your population, give it to them, and they'll run a bunch of names for you because they obviously want to do work with you. But additionally, they will often give you access to their online tools, and you can do some searches there. And this is an offer that Donor Search set up for me. In fact, if you just search at the end of this presentation, special offer for friends of J. Frost on Google, you'll come up with this thing that looks like this, and they'll let you run a screening of 200 names, and they'll let you use their online suite for 30 days. And I would definitely recommend this. If you're looking to identify people and go through the first stage of qualification, that's it. It's free, it's available, and it's right there.
That's super cool, by the way, Jay. Thanks for doing that.
Sure, my pleasure. The next step here is qualification. And so how in the world do you qualify these people? Well, you might have just pulled some data now on them because of some of the things we just described, some of the kind of tools you can use. But there's something you can do internally, even if you don't have any of that. And it's probably a good thing to do no matter what, because it involves your key leaders in a discussion about what they want to do and who's going to do what. And that's a simple peg. Now, again, the slide's a little small, but you can get a copy of this from Panas Linzy, which is Jerold Panas, Linzy Partners, available at panaslinzy.com, or contact me and I can show you the link. But this peg is a very simple idea, and that's along one axis. You can see on the left, the vertical, that's financial capability, and then the horizontal at the bottom, that's current interest or involvement. So what you're asking now is for people, sometimes they know a lot about these people, sometimes they don't, but they're making a personal judgment about that person's financial ability and that person's interest or involvement in your work. And then they're just doing a graph like you would in elementary school. But the reason why this is great is because it gets everybody involved in saying, I'm personally invested in particular relationships. Here's how much I know about this person. Here's why I think the person's a very good prospect for our work, or not. And now maybe what you're doing is you're getting to the point where, by process of setting up some identification and qualification, you're going to be able to move past the 24 number that we first saw. When I first showed you a slide and I said, maybe one of the issues we have is that we ask people for small amounts and we have too few people in our portfolio. If you want to increase the number of people in your portfolio, first you want to screen and or hand select people and find out who has the financial ability and the passion for your work. And then you want to use something like this to qualify it with the people who are going to actually see them face to face. You're going to end up with more than 24 people in your portfolio. And that's really what we want, because I can tell you with complete certainty, and I know it in my soul, there is someone right now who gave you a gift last month or at the end of December, and they're wondering why in the world you haven't called them. I am so certain of it. And so anything you can do to get a little closer to those folks so they feel the love, that's worth it. And then the money, that's gravy. And the PEG is really an easy process for, let's say, your development committee of your board, or a new group of people you want to gather together to start working on major gifts, or even your staff to do some of this qualification. And the grid qualifiers would be simple things like financial capability would be the kinds of financial assets we've been talking about. Annual income, perhaps, if they can estimate it. The number of kids, the fewer the better, is not a judgment about whether or not they should have children, but of whether or not they have money. And for those of us who have children, you know that when you have kids at home or even close to home, that it can be costly. So that's what that means. Age 55 and over is a plus because people are thinking differently about their life at that stage, and they might have more money available to them, especially they're thinking about their assets differently. And then finally, prior gifts to charity. The bigger the gift, the higher the rating. Absolutely. And that's why I mentioned dsgiving.com. It's a great place to look. And then an affinity might be how long they've been involved. Prior gifts to you. Have they directed gifts from institutional sources to you? Have they been involved as board members, like I mentioned, or significant volunteers in the past? I belong to an organization where I've served on the board, and it's really interesting because sometimes I'll find that the organization, through successive generations of professional leadership, all of which have been terrific, will start to forget former board members. Now imagine that. Someone has served on your board, they spent several years, maybe they made gifts, but now they can probably make more if they're still living and they're still involved, and no one's calling them. Prior board members, prior donors, this kind of stuff is golden. Those are effectively your alumni. Now, I just talked about identification, qualification. Now the big thing happens. This is cultivation. And I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about this with you, to introduce a concept called moves management. You could spend days on this, and I'm not going to do that. But you're probably already asleep. So wake up for just a second, because this could be fun. But it is just a way to talk about how to make sure we're doing what we need to do with our donors. It's a system for building really, truly deep, lifelong affinity and commitment with, that shouldn't say probably donors, but probable donors. The reason I use that term probable donors versus prospect is out of deference and respect for Jerold Panas. And Jerry is actually a person who coined this term, moves management, and has been one of the primary facilitators of teaching this process. It's actually pretty simple in many ways. But he likes that term probable donors because he doesn't like thinking of people as targets. And I understand that. The language doesn't necessarily lend itself to easily say probable donor, but what it does is it hopefully changes our mind about these people as being potential partners. And that's the way I like to think about it. Anybody we're finding now who's at the intersection of wealth and interest, anybody now we've done some prospect evaluation for internally with our own team, these are our leaders, we need to interact with these people. Any people who come through that process, well, you know what? We don't just want their money. Not really. What we really want is we want their partnership, because that brings us more money. But more importantly, people who have that kind of passion for what we do, people with that kind of resource they want to commit to what we do, they probably have a great heart and brain in there too. And we would really do well to avail ourselves of it and not think that we have all the answers, but instead could use more natural partners in this process. So let me tell you what I mean by that and explain what a natural partner is as well. But first, I'm going to start with what a move is. What in the world is that? If you come from the world of sales, we wouldn't call it that, but we do in fundraising. And it's quite simply an opportunity to further cultivate a relationship, acquire vital data, and increase awareness of big things that we're doing, really important stuff that might matter to them. So moves cover a whole range of the major gift process. They can be made by personal visits, phone calls, letters, social media, lots of different ways. And some people are more rigid about this than others. But what I think is important is you codify it. You write it down and you say how many you want to have. And why? Because we want to make sure we're constantly in touch with people in a way that's appropriate and tailored to them. So if the person doesn't care about social media, then we aren't going to be relying on Twitter and Facebook to talk with them. But if the person is digitally inclined and they prefer to talk with us by text, then we better stop just trying to call them up if that's not what they want and be willing to text them. So it's tailored to them, and the activity is tailored to their needs and to keeping in touch in an appropriate way. But all the moves have a specific desired outcome that leads naturally to a planned next step. So there is a plan behind everything we do. Who does what? Well, each major gift probable donor or prospect, or whatever term of art you like to use, natural, potential partner, is assigned to a moves manager. This is a staff person. That person could have any title from president to, your development officer or director of development. This person makes certain that the donor is properly cultivated, solicited, and thanked for his or her generosity. It doesn't matter if it's $5 or $500 million. It's all equal. We want to be showing gratitude every day. The moves manager then relies on help from what we might describe as natural partners. And these people could be friends, relatives, associates. But natural partners are really important. And there's usually a couple. There's one who's the person who's closest. And then there's the person who knows the person and is kind of closest to us. So there's a person internally who's the moves manager, a primary player, that's a natural partner to whom the probable donor would have difficulty saying no. They probably ask for a gift in the end. And then a natural partner that's closest to us. Maybe that's a person on our development committee or on a campaign committee. Those three people aren't working all the time together, but they do work and talk together enough sufficiently to drive us toward revenue. They help to really mature a relationship, to be answerable to that relationship, to be sensitive to it and listening carefully. But there's a reason why we invest so much time in it. Because think about whatever your average gift is, and think about what a major gift should be. Remember I talked about an annual or sustaining gift might be X, let's say it's $100, and these gifts should be 10 to 25 times that. And if they're lifetime gifts, 1,000 to 2,000 times that. If you have 24 people in your portfolio and they're each rated at $5,000, that's not bad. Sure, it's good revenue. If you double the size of the portfolio, you've doubled your revenue. And if you double the size of the average gift, and you can do that by targeting the right opportunities, by talking to people, developing those relationships through these partnerships, you're talking about 4 times the revenue that you get currently. Now, you want to set cultivation objectives. You don't want these conversations to be conversations for conversation's sake. You want to be listening to people and focusing on their interest in what you do, and then bringing them information that helps mature that relationship and their involvement. Not fundraiser driven towards the donor-centric, as we often say in the business these days. And prior to each call, each contact, we want to determine what is the best possible outcome and what's the minimum acceptable outcome. And always have that in mind. Is our purpose to have a chance to invite them into the next event at the institution, or is it to set up a meeting to go and ask them for support of a certain project? And we want to know what that outcome is, the desirable outcome, and then the least acceptable outcome. So the person says, not now, but maybe later, come back in 6 months. Maybe that's a minimum acceptable outcome. Maybe it's, I can't attend the event, but I would like to make a contribution for it. So you want to figure those things out. It's exactly why you have 3 people involved. One to whom the person is be difficult to say no, one who's really behind your volunteer effort to drive philanthropy, and another person at the staff level, regardless of title, who's really owning those relationships. This sounds like a lot, and it is. But again, think about the rewards. But I do know you have to figure out how much you can manage. And I like this information from Jocelyn Creative, which I thought was kind of cool. Joanna Jocelyn, who talked about fundraising benchmarks for small nonprofits at $2 million and under. And by the way, again, I have a link to this, like a lot of other stuff at the end of the presentation. According to Joanna Jocelyn, an executive director with administrative help can personally cultivate or solicit 20 donors. And here we're talking all about major donors, okay? A director of development with management, marketing, content creation, and administrative duties can personally cultivate or solicit 50 donors. If you have someone who's a full-time development officer, like a major gift officer, that's 100 to 125 donors. And a board member, 5 to 10. So I think you can look at this and start to think, what are we doing with 25 people? Now, you may be well above that 25 mark. You may have already 100 people in your portfolio, but I'm pretty confident that if you look at these kinds of benchmarks, you make some internal manageable assignments, then you can increase, perhaps double or even triple your portfolio. And doing those 2 steps we talked about prior with identifying people who have resources as well as passion. So we don't just want people who love us or just people with money. We want both. So that's identification, doing the pegs so people are involved in this process, and then making assignments is going to be critical. And then all the other steps we talked about in moves management are a way of just setting up that pattern of activity and writing a plan for it. So effectively, we have, let's say, a 1-page plan for each person in our major donor prospect pool. So that's fine. Great. We've got people identified. We've qualified them. Now we're cultivating them. Well, we have to ask them for money at some point. We can't just aim. We've got to eventually pull the trigger. We've got to ask them for their support. And asking in person is tough. In the Institute for Charitable Giving, where I teach every year, and it's a great program. I have a link to that at the end too. There's 2 days on this subject about asking, and one part is about asking in person. And we talk about the chicken bone in the throat, that feeling you have when you're about to say, would you consider making a contribution of $500,000 to our program? It gets easy to say when you've been saying it for a while. It's hard at first. So if you're new to this process, that might be the hardest thing, to get those words out of your mouth. And so some things that help with that are, first, to have some guidelines for setting up a visit, which I have for you here. And again, if you'd like to, we can talk about it offline. But it's basically a process of sending a letter first. And I think a physical letter is best. And then thinking of yourself in the prospect's shoes, selecting a time to call, preparing for that call, standing up where your voice sounds so much better, and then just setting up a meeting. So not discussing everything over the phone, but just setting up a meeting. And they'll know that you're calling to ask for money. But and this, of course, follows meetings upon meetings, discussions, touch points, thank you notes, all these things. This is following all that process. 85% of the work has been done, and now you're just setting up a meeting. So once that's done and you send a confirmation letter, you do want to have a meeting where you're building rapport, establishing that you both care about this thing by listening the majority of the time and talking the least amount of time, and asking questions, open questions, so you can really understand the importance of the organization and its mission to that person, not to you. It's about their needs, not your needs. You're effectively doing what Jerold Panas and I describe as listening the gift. There's an old, really cheesy and somewhat crude movie, but funny sometimes, called American Pie, where a father says one thing in it. He says, "Interested is interesting." And the reason that stuck with me, despite the rest of the movie being so trashy, is because it's absolutely true. And if we really listen to people, they will know it. And if they know it, they will open up and they will tell us things perhaps they haven't felt permission to tell anyone. And that's where people are at the point of making decisions that are beyond the scope of that day-to-day decision, the decision that comes from what's in my wallet to what's in my heart, and to ones that affect how they are to be remembered by others. That's what these meetings are about. And then eventually, of course, we do ask, but we're asking through the lens of their language and their interest and their need, and we're inviting them to do what they've told us they're willing to do already. So we're sure going to give our own testimony, and we are going to ask. I'd like you to consider, based upon all these things you've just told me, and then just be quiet and let them noodle on it. If I sat here in silence, in fact, let's just do it for a few seconds. You might feel a little uncomfortable. That was only 10 seconds. In a meeting like this, I would say the average is probably at least 15, 20 seconds. but they can go long, minutes, while people are trying to think about the difference between doing maybe what they thought about before and what they could actually do. Empowering to do something with their resources that maybe they hadn't considered fully until that moment, that you have given them permission to consider that option. Now, you might have objections, and we could spend all day talking about objections, and I have a whole bunch of slides on that if anybody ever wants it. But the main point is, if people say they're not sure, they have objections, those are your friends. It allows you to answer questions, not to argument. And so I think that anytime you listen to people and you give them the chance to think, that it's a win-win, because it wins for them. It gives them the opportunity to really consider. And it wins for you because it means that you can really hear what their thought process is and how committed they are to this and how they can really work with you in partnership. And if they object to certain parts of it, be open to those objections, not to provide a ready answer, but really to consider it thoughtfully and then respond so they get comfortable with making that investment. By the way, we don't always find we're successful. And if we don't, I think it's usually for these kinds of reasons, but most of all, the one at the bottom. We failed to ask. And so if you were going to summarize this whole point and this whole part of this session in what can we do better, it would be, let's give people a chance to say their piece rather than trying to sell. When we talk to them about the project that they've expressed an interest in, let's use their language to show that we've heard them and we really care about their point of view. And then let's give them the honor of actually asking for their support and being specific about it, what the need is and how much. And by the way, I know that for some of us, this is tough stuff. And so you might have an automatic negative thought. At least I know some of your colleagues will. We've never done it that way. It can't be done. It'll cost too much. We've been doing it all right without it. Let's put it off. We have all these other things we have to do. And in the case of many small organizations, it doesn't work here. Donors don't give at that level here. We have to do it through the institutions. This is where we get all of our money. And I would say you've got to fight the automatic negative thoughts, the ants. Why? The answer is twofold. This is where the money is. And denying people an opportunity to invest in the things that matter to them is really, really a horrible thing. We have the privilege, really, of being able to work on projects which fulfill not only our own dreams and help a lot of people, but enable people who have amassed some resource to actually put it to use for the first time. It's a wonderful thing. So on your mark, I would say if you're going to do something, do this. Select 10 to 25 of your best opportunities. These are the ones you identified through this process of identification and qualification and so forth. Collect easy access research on each. Identify your natural partners. Then get set by consulting confidentially with those partners, selecting a person who's going to be the solicitor, a person who's hard to say no to. Develop a strategy. Maybe it's one page for each opportunity, and establish a gift objective and plan your next several moves. It doesn't need to be 7. That's the typical number, but it needs to be the right number for the person. And then go implement those steps. Record everything you do in your database, and then refine your objectives as appropriate, tuning up each piece for each next move. Always thinking about the destination. You want to keep the end in mind. This isn't about Buddhism here. This is about bottom line, and it does work. And you may need to add and delete people from your portfolio, but that's okay. The main point is you want to keep that destination in mind, and most importantly now, you're not walking that path alone anymore. You've got your internal partners, your volunteer partners, and most importantly, your donor partners. The people who maybe were giving you $100 before and now are thinking about taking money away from their families in order to help somebody else. Or as some people like to say in fundraising, to plant a tree, the shade from which they will never experience. They're doing this for the next generation. So that's the cycle up until stewardship. So what in the world is stewardship about? Well, actually, a lot of what moves management is about is, in fact, stewardship. It's listening to people. It's really showing that you've heard them. It's maintaining the relationship, constantly thanking them, constantly informing them. It boils down to 2 things. And there are many ways to do stewardship, and they're going to be tailored to your organization. But one is listening up. And I love this cartoon, this old Peanuts cartoon that said, you know, Lucy, I don't need to read it to you, but where she says, so what do you think? And what difference does it make? You never listen to me anyway, says Charlie Brown. And she says, well, I was just making conversation, to which she replies, when you make conversation, you have to listen too. And she says, you do? I know a lot of development people who unfortunately are more selling than listening, or others who listen but then never ask. We've got to bring those two skill sets together, if not for our organizations, then for our donors. And we've got to do one other thing, which is to constantly say thank you, and do it with our own hand and in person. I don't have a stat on it right in front of me, but I can tell you that the more you do this, the better off you are. And for those of you who have grown up in a generation which is post-telephone, I would say picking up the phone and saying thank you to people is enormously powerful. Some organizations that have done this see not only a huge, like a doubling in revenue, but much more importantly, the number of probable donors in their pool for major gifts. I have a lot of resources here that talk to all the things I've been addressing with you. You can't possibly read this in the slide, but you'll be happy to know when you have the slides, you can just click these links and you can get to them. And they range from stuff on the web, which is all free and great, and a lot of it's focused on smaller organizations, to training, which you can get in various places, to a couple classics for your bookshelf that really I cut my teeth on, and I'm sure you'll find valuable for you as well. So with that, I've really eaten up a lot of airtime. I want to throw the baton to Dan and answer any and all questions that you might have if you've still stuck through this with me.
Yeah, no, we don't have anybody leaving. So, Jay, that is great stuff. And if you are new to our webinar series or new to a fundraising webinar, we really can't emphasize enough to take advantage of some of these tools. This is amazing stuff. Like Jay said, a lot of these topics are things that really you could do. In fact, I did a whole webinar on just stewardship as an example. There's a lot there. You should be able to come back and see my screen, and there's some contact information for both myself and for Jay. So hopefully you can see that now. I know that some of you are struggling to see some of those details on the slide, which is no problem. We'll get you copies of these slides, and what will happen is you'll get an email here and within a day or two, and letting you know that we have a recording of this available, as well as copies of the slides. So, Jay, can you do a few questions?
Absolutely.
All right. So we have a question here, and so we are a new startup nonprofit. Do we need to tailor our approach to ask for major gifts from first-time donors, given our early stage status?
I think the short answer would be, I think every organization does need to tailor what it does for each and every one of its donors. Absolutely. I think that the challenge we have is first getting to know what is the expectation of our donors vis-a-vis our program. They may not know it as well as we'd like to think they know it. And then not only knowing whether or not they're qualified to help us financially, but whether they've been trained to interact with us in a certain way. What I mean by that is that we might have been sending solicitations by mail forever, and now suddenly we're thinking about sitting down with them. It might be a little shocking for them at first. So yes, I think that this should be individually tailored to both the organization and to the donors in your organization, being mindful of what their relationship is with you and how well they understand your program. But it's a great opportunity. I mean, that's why I love thank you calls, because let's say you have a person who's new to the staff. They have the best job in the world. They can call anybody and just say, I'm new. I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself, and I wanted to thank you for all the support you've given to this organization. It is the easiest and best excuse to ever make a phone call.
Totally agree with that. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough either. Jeff Griffin said to say thank you, fantastic learning, and he said to say thank you. We have Robert, who asked, can you ever overdo it with contacting a major donor, say someone older who is more reclusive?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can overdo anything, and we just need to probably practice our listening skills. If the person's sending us an indication that we are coming on too strong, that we're contacting them too frequently, that we're using the wrong channels, then we should honor that right away. Maybe just ask them, just be very honest and say, now I know we've been contacting you by mail. every month for the last, 5,000 years. Is that information helpful to you? Would you like more or less? I know we just talked a month ago. When would you like to talk again? And then if you're not getting a date from them, then you help provide that. But I think it's very good to be sensitive to this. But I wouldn't make that decision for them. I would let them tell you.
Good. I think we have time for one more. It's a good question. Several people have asked us in the past, but any tips or insights on how to get my board a little more engaged in the fundraising process?
Wow.
I know that's a whole hour in itself, but just any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I've done that has been really helpful to me. And that is, and you can do this sometimes internally, sometimes it's helpful to do through a consultant. And I don't know which is better in your case, but that is to craft your case statement. We didn't talk about case statements today, but they're essentially documents that allow people to have a discussion about the program and the project and so forth. What's the vision for the future? And the reason why I think that's helpful as a draft is you can sit down with individual board members in a confidential way and say, here's the document we've drafted. Can you just tear it up with me essentially and tell me what's right, what's wrong, and use that as an opportunity to ask them some really good questions about who they are and why they are there. And the more you listen, the more you can get them talking, the more you'll learn about what their potential impediments are to asking for support. Sometimes it's just as simple as they're uncomfortable because they're not familiar with it, and so they're scared. But other times it's because no one's really probed with them to find out what it is that they want to do or can do. And there might also be other things they would only tell in confidence, such as there's a conflict with either other board members or with the president of the organization. But anything you can do to get people to open up in a confidential way will be helpful to them. And it may help you to figure out what the plan is for each individual board member, as well as for the board as a whole, since many boards do not have any job descriptions or any plan for their work.
Right. So we are at 11 o'clock. Colette, can you do one more question just to finish things off?
Sure.
So, this will be the last question. Anything else? Just want to again notice that they have Jay's email, his website, his Twitter. He's very active and engaging. Encourage you to reach out if there's any other questions. But Colette is asking, if your donors are across the United States, how do you have something like a face-to-face?
This is done lots of different ways, Colette. What I think is best actually is when you can to meet with people face to face, but I know that that's not usually a first meeting. What I can tell you is that meetings are being done in so many different ways now, including virtual meetings. I don't find them ideal personally, but they can work well with some donors. And I have been involved in campaigns where even 7-figure asks have been made successfully using Skype. I'm not recommending this. I'm just saying it's possible. You know what's best, I think? It sounds like my same old answer to everything, so you all will slap me after this. And that is whatever works best for the donor. Yeah. And you know what? If that means it costs us more in travel, we better be willing to pay it. Because if we're not, then they're not really our partners. And if we really want them involved, then we want to hear what they have to say. So I'm really glad you asked that question. We need to see the people who care.
Yeah, great. Well, Jay, I know you're very busy, and as all of our fellow fundraisers and executive directors and pastors out there that are listening, we want to thank you. Tune in for our next webinar next month. We're going to be talking about how to be the best fundraiser in the world. It's going to be very interesting with a marketing expert, Joe Wagner. And Jay, we want to thank you again for your time, and I want to personally thank you for all that you've done for the fundraising field. And I know many organizations who have benefited from your knowledge and your passion. So I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you, everybody. It was great being with you.
Yeah, and again, we will send out an email with links and proper information about recordings and all of that. So with that, I want to wish everybody a great day and all the best success in your nonprofit and fundraising efforts. So thank you, everybody.